Good morning, everybody. As we go to the chitas of today, holding the portion of Shmini. Today is Thursday. We're holding the fifth reading in that portion. We're holding on chapter 10, verse number 16. So now we come to the story where Moshe Rabbeinu is asking about one of the sacrifices that was not eaten on that day, the sacrifice of the Shchaydah. And Moshe inquired about the sin offering, the he-goat, and he discovered Vayhine Sarif, and he found out on his inquiry that it was burnt. Vayiktzef Elazar, his son, and he got angry on Elazar and some of his nephews. Bnei Aaron, the children of Aaron and his son that were left over, that survived, Lamer saying, Rash says this was the goat amongst the additional offering of the Chodesh. There were 3 sin offering goats that were brought in that day. Number 1 was the young goat of the installation. Number 2 was the goat donated by Nachshon, but not the leader of the tribe of Yehuda. That was because it was the first day of dedication. Each tribe for the next 12 days gave a sacrifice from the Chodesh Nisan until you did Beis Nisan. So that was number 2. And then number 3 was the Rosh Chodesh, to go for the Chodesh. Every Rosh Chodesh is supposed to bring a sin offering. So that's what we say Musav on Rosh Chodesh, because that's extra offering that was brought. It's brought on Rosh Chodesh. So Mekul and Moshe Rabbeinu realized that everything else was eaten. He commanded, in general, you had to burn it. Achatas has to be burned. But over here, everything was eaten besides this one. So the question is, the sage of Israel differ regarding this. Some say it was burnt because the ritual defilement and entity touched it. Others say it was burnt because of Aaron and his sons were oinanim. They were mourners in the day of passing. So the mourners of day of passing are called an oinin, and they're not obligated in many commandments because it's of the day of passing, and therefore he thought maybe it was burnt because of that. If you should because since it was sacrificed for all time. The difference between the 3 was that the first 2, the installation and Nachshon, was only brought once in history. Nachshon, they only did the karbanos of the tribes, was only on the dedication, and also the carbon, the sacrifice of the installation, was only done by the installation. So it was never done again. But the carbon of a Rosh Chodesh is brought every Rosh Chodesh. However, regarding the other 2 goats that were in the one-time sacrifice, they relied on Moshe, who told them that regarding the grain offering, eat them unleavened loaves and with unleavened bread. So therefore, they felt that the general sacrifice they had to eat. The sacrifice of the day they had to eat, but the carbon of the Rosh Chodesh they shouldn't have eaten. But Moshe Rabbeinu was seemingly unhappy about this. The 2 inquiries was that this sin offering was not burnt, and number 2, why were the other 2 eaten? Why were these other 2 eaten? So he asked, why'd you make a difference between the other 2 and this one? Elazar his son, why did he get angry on Elazar his son and his nephews? He should have got angry on his brother. Out of respect for Aaron, Aaron was his older brother. He turned his faces towards his son while displaying anger, even though he was angry at Aaron too. Lamer, he told him, respond to my question. Why didn't you eat the sin offering? The Makom Kodesh in a holy place in the Beis Hamikdash. Ki Kodesh Dashim is holy of holies. And God gave it to you. Lasses is Aveda to carry the sin of the people. To bring them forgiveness. Say Hashem before God. Now she says, did they then eat it outside the holy place? Did he ask them that if they ate it outside the Beis Hamikdash? How did not burnt it? Why then it meant a statement the holy places? However, he asked them, perhaps it was taken outside. He said, maybe this carbon, my mistake, was taken outside, so it became defiled, became invalid. But they told him no. because it's it's disqualified, taken outside the courtyard. They told him no, it's not taken out. He then asked, if it was a holy place, why did you not eat it? And furthermore, the priests eat the sacrifice and the owners thereby gain atonement. And this is a carbon for the Jewish people of Rosh Chodesh. And if you're not going to eat it, you're not going to bring atonement. From here we drive the goat to offer it on Rosh Chodesh, which atones for the unintentional ritual defilement of the sanctuary and the sacrifice of the 8th-day offering of Nachshon, sin offering, were not brought for atonement. They were brought from the tribe itself. So that's where Rashi proves that we're talking about the Rosh Chodesh offering. Verse 18, Hein lo huva dam melakedesh penima. Behold, this sacrifice, the blood was not brought into the sanctuary like the Yom Kippur sacrifice. So therefore, you had to eat it. As I commanded you, why didn't you eat it? Now she says, if the blood would have brought into the sanctuary, it didn't be burnt. But any sin offering, some whose blood is brought into the tent of meeting, must be burnt to fire, but yours wasn't. So, means you should have eaten it and not burned it, even though you're owning him. As a concern the grain offering, I commanded you to eat everything. Verse 19, Moshe Rabbeinu said, did they offer up their sin offering or their ascent offering today before God? And then, in such a tragic event like this befell me, my 2 sons died. You're asking me to eat the chatas of the day, the chatas of the Chodesh. If I would have eaten the chatas of the Chodesh, Hayita be'ein Hashem, would this be pleasing in the eyes of God? Now she says, Vayidaber, when it says dibur in the pasuk instead of vayomer, Vayidaber is usually harsh. It's possible Moshe was angry with Elazar and Shama, and Aaron spoke up. Response: you must conclude that is again out of respect. The sons did not answer. So even though the sons were challenged, the sons didn't answer anything. They said it would not be correct for our father sits here and we speak in his presence. Nor would it be correct that a disciple contradicts his teacher. I might think that Eliezer did not have an answer, Pasha couldn't speak. So we know when Eliezer was spoke to speak, and then when Eliezer, what the priest said to the soldiers. So we see that Eliezer didn't have a problem speaking. Pasha didn't want to speak in front of his father, neither did he want to contradict his uncle. But today, and it happened to me like this, meaning even if the dead were not my sons, but other relatives for whom I'm obligated to mourn in the same way as these, regarding all whom I stated in the passage about priests, like my mother, my father, that the priest must ritually defile himself for them. Now my 2 sons die in front of me. I'm going to do v'achalti chaltas, and v'achalta ayita means that if I would have eaten it, would God been happy? Hayom, today, meaning in the state of mourning, if I would eat the carbon of Rosh Chodesh, would that be a right thing to do? Ayita be'ein Hashem. Though you heard this prohibition against mourners eating sacrifices suspended regarding one-time sacrifice, you cannot infer this lenient regarding sacrifice prescribed for all times. Vayishma Moshe, and Moshe heard his brother. Vayita be'einav, and it was pleasing in his eyes. Rashi says, Hoida v'lo bosh. He admitted that Aaron's reason was superior to his own, and it was not ashamed to say publicly, I did not hear it. Lo shamaiti. You have taught me something unusual. You have taught me something phenomenal. Imagine Moshe Rabbeinu says that Aaron taught, even though he was a teacher of the Jewish nation, he's not embarrassed to say, I'm a student also. I've learned something new and phenomenal from Aaron, my brother. And that completes the Chumash for today. We continue the Alter Rebbe's Tanya in chapter 42. The Alter Rebbe was telling us that we have the capability in our lives to create a unity, a relationship with God in any kind of level that we are on, and we can all create this concept with Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and everybody has that capacity, even if he's not a tzaddik, even if he's not a great scholar, etc. So, why? Because every Jew needs to comprehend that God is above him, that God is watching him. Whether he's a righteous man, whether he's a wicked man, whether he's a struggling man, God is looking at him. Although he has no bodily likeness, how then can he possibly say that God possesses an eye and an ear? It says in the Mishnah, as we learned, it says in the Mishnah, the Pirkei Avos says, "Ayin roya v'oisha shamas," that a Jew has to realize there's an eye that looks and there's an ear that hears. Now, how can we say on God that he has an eye and an ear? An eye and an ear is a physical thing, it's an organ. On the contrary, this is even greater than the God who has an eye, a human being that has an eye that hears, the eye that sees, and the ear that hears. Everything is revealed and known to him infinitely more than we're just using the eye that sees and the ear that hears an analogy, but really the Eibishter sees and hears greater than the eye and the ear that hears. For example, through the physical medium of sight and hearing, the Eibishter doesn't need to have an eye or an ear. When we say God does not possess any bodily likeness, we mean that he is not bound by the frailties of the physical body. Sometimes I can have an ear, but I cannot hear clearly. Physical eye can observe corporality, but not spirituality. You can see only with them when there's adequate light, and only up to a given distance, and so on. Physical hearing is likewise limited. God's seeing and hearing, however, possesses only the merits of these faculties, but none of their physical limitation. So whatever you can imagine sight, God has a much greater sight. For it goes without saying that any quality possessed by the created beings is surely possessed by the Creator. It's only by illustration. Like a person. When a person doesn't have to see what's happening in his body, he feels it. Because his whole body is part of him. So if a man who knows and feels within himself all that's happening, too, and being experienced by each of the 248 organs, such as cold and heat, he feels it. He doesn't just see the cold and heat. He doesn't have to. He feels it. It's part of his body. A few even the heat in his toenails, al derech mashal. If when it's scorched by fire, I feel it. So when I got burned, God forbid, my feet got burnt, I feel the pain. Do I see the burn? I don't. Well, sometimes I don't see the burn. It could be in a burn. I can see that it's burnt. Because it's part of me. Everything is part of God. Also their essence and their substance. Meaning, not only is a person aware of what happened to his organs, he also feels the organs himself. And everything that affects an organ in the hidden body, it's a person's senses in his brain. So one would not need to use his eyes or ears to see what's happening in limbs of his body, such as pain of a burn or hand or foot. He knows, he senses it, he feels it in his mind. And in a similar matter of knowledge, by way of analogy, self-understood that this is an analogy. The Eibishter knows everything that's happening in the world because it's all him. He knows it for himself. Whether the upper creation, lower creation, everything comes from him. Everything comes from him. So the whole world is like one big body to God. So just as the brain, which is a source of life for the whole body, knows what transpires within it, so too God, which is the source of all life, knows exactly what's happening from itself. Nobody has to tell him what's happening. This doesn't mean what it says. There's no creature hidden from you. in so much that all created being emanate from you. Everything is you. As the Rambam writes, that is and Viskim Chachma Kabbalah, that the Kamishkasa Ramak, which is brought in the Kabbalah, something the Rambam writes, what's also brought in the Kabbalah, Shevedias Atzma Kavayachal. That's so to say by God knowing Himself. God, by knowing Himself, He knows everything that exists from Him. So, however, God provides creation with life in a different manner than the manner which the soul provides life to the body. The soul must garb itself in the body in order to provide life. But by doing so, it is affected by the body. But in clothing implies that the object undergoes a change. God, however, so even though that's why it's only an analogy, because ultimately the soul is affected by the body. As we say, the soul is in exile in the body. But the Eibishter is Ani violation nisi. God says, I don't change. So it's only an analogy. Just like the soul, the brain feels the entire body, God feels the will. But it's an analogy because the soul is affected by the body. And that's why there comes a time, chas v'shalom, the soul leaves the body. But the God doesn't change, the body doesn't change it. Of course, it's not subject to change when He provides life to creation. Hence, it's only an analogy of the soul and the body. I'm giving you this analogy to calm the ear, to make it possible for man's ear and intellect to perceive how one may know something without having actual see it or hear it. So it's an analogy. But if you want to go to the essence of it, the truth, there's no analogy, there's no real good analogy to God. So there's not a good real analogy. The soul and the body is not a good analogy. For the human soul, even the rational soul and divine soul, it ultimately is affected by what happens to the body and the pain. The Frierdiker Rebbe would say a small soul or a small hole in the body is a great pain to the soul. Because the soul cannot accomplish its mission to the body if the body is in pain. Because the soul is ultimately comes into the body. And it clothes itself in the body. So therefore, ultimately, if the body is affected, the soul is affected in a way. But the Eibishter, even though He comes into the world, He doesn't affect it. The soul is not affected, God forbid, from the events of the world and its changes. Not from the world itself. He is not affected by existence, the essence and being of the world. Because ultimately this world does not affect in God and change in God. Chas v'shalom. God forbid anybody should say that this world affects a change in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Can't see that. Nor in His absolute unity. Just as He's one and unified before He created them, so too He remains one and unified after He created them. In order to us to understand this well in our mind, the scholars of truth, the Kabbalistic teachings, have already treated at length in their books, as an explanation will be found there. So therefore, if you really want to go into the depths of what this meaning is, that God comes into the world, He's above the world, all this concept of Malaklam, Seviklam, the way God's within the world, and the way God's above the world, and they're both happening at the same time, which the Rambam says is the concept of He's the knower and the knowing and the knowledge, and something which is incomprehensible in a human mind. The Kabbalistic rabbis try to explain it. I'll call you so. Nevertheless, a Jew is a believer. That means we have the capability of going above seichel. Oh, however, all the Jews are the descendants of the patriarchs who believe in God. We are all called believers, descent from believers, without any speculation of mortal intellect and whatsoever. So therefore, we don't establish our relationship with God only on intellect. Our relationship with God is based on the munah. V'oimrim, we say Atu Achel Nivra, and we say it every day in our David, Adayin Olam, Hashem Allah, B'Terem Kov, Nehu Ayav, V'hu Yiveh, V'hu Yiyeh, B'Sifara, and Atu Achnivra, you are the same before the world was created, you're the same after the world was created. So we all say the same statement, whether we are great scholars, whether we are simple Jews, we all come to the same conclusion that the Eibishter is above and beyond the world, and God, even though as he comes into the world, he's not affected by the world whatsoever, and the world is united with him at the same, so the world can be the opposite of him and at the same time be united with him, and it's not a contradiction to God. To God, there's no contradiction in this world. Pasha concludes, you're the same since the world was created. Thus, all Jews firmly believe that the world's creation causes no change in God. If you comprehend it, if you don't comprehend it, we all came to the same conclusion. Knisel El Perek, as I explained in the 20th chapter of Tanya. That completes the Tanya of today. My friends, today is the 26th day of the month, which is the second part of the chapter 119. If you do the second part from the letter Mem to the end of the chapter, you'll do the Chitas of the day. The Rebbe writes in the Yom Yom, the day to day for today of the 26th day of Nisan. The Rebbe writes in the name of the Frierdiker Rebbe, from my Sicha, from my father, Chassidus teaching demands that one wash his flesh as pesare, with water, and clothe himself in them, the priestly robes. What does that mean? The intellectual elements of Chassidus must thoroughly cleanse the flesh and rinse away the habits of the flesh. The habits are alludes to the word es, end, in the quoted verse, signifying that which is incidental to the flesh. The habits developed by the body. Only then can one clothe himself in sacred garments. So first you got to go to the mikveh to get rid of the habits of the flesh to be able to clothe the garments of God. Pondering Chassidus, discussing Chassidus, and the practice of Chassidim to meditate before davening, these are the sacred garments, the garments that were given from the heights of sanctity. But it is the person himself who must wash his flesh with water. The garments of the soul are given to an individual from on high. By washing away unwholesome incidentals that arise from the body's nature and make his body himself a flesh of sanctity, this is achieved solely by man's own effort. This what Chassidus demands is that the ideal that our great teacher, the Alter Rebbe, devoted himself totally and selflessly. He opened the channels of total devotion, sacrifice for serving God through prayer, to be bound up with the essence of the infinite light of God. Chassidus places a chassid face to face with the essence of Ein Sof. Wow, what a beautiful statement. That was a statement of the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe. I wish you all a wonderful day. We're going back to learn at 10 o'clock. We're going to learn a Sicha of the Rebbe. Beautiful Sicha, one of the classical Sichas of the Rebbe. Wow, on the Rashi today, one of the beauties of the Rebbe's teaching, how the Rebbe looked at a Rashi, is truly phenomenal. I don't know if anybody else looked at a Rashi this way, but it's one of the classical teachings of the Rebbe, in Shem, on Chumash and Rashi. You can come to Shul, to Chabad, or you can come on Zoom, Torah Direct. Come and learn. Come and learn how the Rebbe learned a Rashi. That's going to blow your mind. Have a wonderful and beautiful day.